Hi. So this video is really for anybody who's thinking about starting to learn Spanish as their first foreign language, and I'm not really interested in taking a course at a university or taking a course at a language school or taking courses with a teacher. Maybe your schedule just doesn't allow that, or maybe you found, like me, that the majority of language courses just are not effective. Often teachers even lack the basic knowledge of either teaching or the language that they're trying to teach. So if you are considering taking up learning Spanish, this is my opinions on one of the aspects, which is the writing aspect of it. I've been studying Spanish for a couple of years now on my own. I don't take courses, I don't take classes, I don't pay for independent classes online. I just study myself. So what you'll see first is up on the screen is me writing a practice essay. Writing is one of the things which is often overlooked when people try to study. It's horrible. It can be a real, pain to sit down and say, right, I'm going to practice writing an essay today. Now, you don't obviously have to write an essay, but one of the things that I like doing is writing essays because I think that they require you to formulate your ideas. And if you do a timed essay, which is what you can see that I'm doing on the screen, is that it really does force you to take seriously the writing aspect of the language. So what you find on the video is that I took a question from a book called 501 Learning Prompts from, I think, a company called Learning Express. I'll put a link to that book down in the description. The first thing that you might find odd is that the book is actually a book of English questions covering a whole range of topics. I don't think that's a problem. Many people say that if you're studying Spanish, then you should only do Spanish questions. Well, realistically, I think an essay is an essay. It doesn't really matter if you do, that question is presented in English or if that question is presented in Spanish. All I do is actually just take the question, read it, and then just do a very simplified translation of the question in Spanish. Then plan my essay, and then obviously write the answer in Spanish. So it doesn't really matter where you get your material from, as long as you're writing in Spanish and you're thinking about the language. I really don't think that actually matters. I like doing timed essays, which I think are good for forcing you to write. I mean, I used to say, right, okay, I'm going to do a piece of writing today, and I'm going to do a practice letter, or I'm going to do a practice essay, or I'm going to write a description of my holiday or whatever in Spanish. And what I found was that I'd sit down and I may spend 30 minutes writing over 2 or 3 hours. So I really didn't find that it was very effective or efficient to just sit down and say, right, okay, Saturday morning I'm going to sit down and do some writing. Because I'd end up wasting the whole morning only doing about 30 minutes writing. So what I do now is I do timed essays. So I sit down and go, okay, I'm going to give myself 30 minutes or 45 minutes to write an essay, and I stick to it. Whatever I've done within that time is what I've done. I don't sit there and go, oh, well, I'm going to give myself 5 minutes more. I try and force myself to write within a set amount of time, because it forces you to be more efficient, you don't waste time, and it also forces you to really have to focus on the language, where one of the things that a lot of people, don't really think about or don't really consider important, but I think is very important, is not that you can actually do something within a language, so, I can write an essay in Spanish to this level, level X, but can you do it under time constraints? So if you've got, say, 3 hours to write an essay, and you sit down and you spend, say, 30 minutes planning or 45 minutes thinking about what you're going to write, and then you spend, say, 2 hours using a dictionary, using whatever resources you've got online, whether you're using, Google or looking up information on the internet. And then you spend another 15 minutes at the end going through editing everything that you've done. Yeah, sure, you can actually show just how good your Spanish can be. But realistically, is that as good as your Spanish is? For me, if you're working under time conditions, where you've got, say, 30 minutes or 40 minutes where you have to just really just think about what you're writing, you don't have time to really think about, should you write a sentence using one verb instead of another? You just have to produce. The language that you use and the level that you actually produce at in Spanish under tight time constraints, say 30 minutes or 40 minutes, where you have to read the question, think about the question, write your answer, and make sure that you've got everything as good as you can do for your level, is really the true expression of what your level is, that what you can do with the language. I mean, I always think about it in terms of just comparing it to English. If somebody said, right, Jeff, you've got 30 minutes, we want you to just write about this topic X. I'm not really going to be thinking about whether I'm using the correct verb, or whether I am using the correct sentence structure, because it's my first language. And what I do in English is try and think about the communication. What am I trying to get to? What is the point that I'm trying to explain? And trying to link those ideas together. So if you treat Spanish differently from that, I really think that you're doing yourself a misservice, because you want to start using the language and you want to sit there and say, well, in reality, this is where my Spanish is. It doesn't matter whether it's really high or really low. You just produce under the skills that you currently have. You have to really focus on what you're trying to communicate, because you have a very little amount of time to do it. So that you kind of forget about the Spanish and you end up just trying to focus on what you're trying to say, which is realistically what you would do in English, for example, if English is your first language, where when you're trying to write something, you just focus on what you're trying to communicate. Okay, you may edit it afterwards and say, well, I can write this in a different way, or I can write that in a different way. But you don't spend very long doing it. If you're putting an email together, you're just going to write what you need to write and then send it off. So I think that timed essays are really, really good for showing you where your real level is. Because another problem is that some students try to trick themselves into believing that their language is better than it actually is. Now, it doesn't really matter how good your language is. I mean, just look at this. I mean, I'm putting up me writing an essay into YouTube so that you can see what it's really like. I mean, what somebody who's studying the language on their own has to do on a Saturday morning when it's sunny, instead of going out and playing with the dogs in the park, or taking the kids to the cinema, or going for lunch with your partner. It's right, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write this, and if I make mistakes, so what? I mean, that's part of the learning process. So you really have to sit there and say, right, I want to start writing on a regular basis. I mean, you don't have to write every day and you don't have to write every week, but I think that writing is a really important process within the self-study method, because it's something that you can do on your own. It's something that you can just sit down and say, what, I'm going to produce and use the language, focusing on communication. And if I make mistakes, so what? That's really part of the learning process, is that you've got to make mistakes. Now, I don't know the mistakes that I'm making. All I've done, for example, in this essay, is just taken a question, translated that question into Spanish, planned it, and then written the essay within about 30 minutes. Now, you could be looking at what I'm writing and say, his Spanish is terrible. Why did he write this? Why didn't he write that? Why is he putting a comma there? Why, etc., etc. Well, so what? It's something that you have to do. Now, the flip side to that is one of the bad things about studying Spanish on your own, I must admit, is if you're doing writing, so if you're producing an essay, well, you don't have a teacher you can go to and say, well, can you mark this essay for me? You don't have a resource in which you can refer to and say, look, tell me what I've done wrong. What are my main problems? How can I improve this? Now, obviously, there are some, forums where you can post pieces of writing online and people will mark it for you, etc., etc. But that process tends to be slow, and you often get conflicting ideas on what is good and what is bad. So the bad thing about studying Spanish on your own with the writing is that lack of feedback. Now, if you've got somebody you can actually, just say, well, can you spend 5 minutes and just check over my essay for me? Then that's going to be, priceless, to be honest. So it is one of the things that you have to be prepared to sort of just accept that, yeah, okay, you're going to be practicing Spanish, but you may not get any feedback on that. But that doesn't really matter, I think. As long as you just keep at it over time, your language will just naturally improve. Obviously, it'd be better if you can have some feedback. If you don't have feedback, well, it doesn't really matter. Okay. I'm writing this essay for between 220 and 260 words. The only reason I'm doing that is it kind of ties in quite nicely with Delhi. I always think that is quite a good resource to use if you're studying on your own, because they actually have a set curriculum of what you need to know for each level of the Delhi exams, the Delhi Spanish exams, which you can use to actually format your own study plan. So you can sit there and go, okay, I'm going to use this resource and I know that I need to know A, B, and C, and you can study on that, and when you learn that, you can kind of move on to the next thing. So the only reason I'm choosing sort of 220, 260 words is because it's sort of kind of similar to the Delhi exam, but it doesn't really matter that the question I'm doing is not based on a Delhi exam. It's just practicing the skills of writing. And don't be over concerned with, trying to do everything right. Realistically, all you can do is just keep going. I think learning a language is like a war of attrition, where it almost doesn't matter what you do or how you study or when you study, as long as you study regularly and you focus on all of the aspects of the language. I really don't think that it matters. It's just as long as you put the hours in, then you will see improvements. Now, obviously, one of the things that you want to really, really focus on is trying to be the most efficient that you can be in your writing process. You don't want to sort of do something which is inefficient. And unfortunately, that is something that you have to find out during your journey of studying Spanish. You have to find what works for you and what doesn't work for you, and what is most beneficial for you. So it could be that writing is something that you absolutely detest, or it could be that it's something you really, really love. So it depends on the person on whether you should focus on it or not. You have to do it, but whether you put it as the primary source of your studies or just a secondary thing that you do, every now and again, will obviously depend on your study plan and what you want to do and what's best for you or not. So the only thing I'd say, particularly with the writing, is make sure that you do it, and it doesn't matter if you don't get any real feedback, as long as you actually get some practice done. That's the best thing. And also, any comments on what you think about my answer to the question I've written, I'd much appreciate some comments down below. So have a great day.